Everyone, how are you? Thank you so much for coming. Really do appreciate it. When we started this academic resilience series, we just were hoping to get 1, 2 students and we'll be okay. If you can learn something from this session, it will be so beneficial to you in your learning and in your academic journey at Minas University. My name is Dr. Margaret Lilo. I am an academic advisor and an associate professor in the academic advising and student development department. And I am so happy that you are here. Just pay attention to what our dear faculty here have to say. And Christy, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And I'm hoping that we're going to eat some pizza before you leave. We've got a lot for you. So this series in this fall has all been about improving your reading skills and how important reading comprehension is to success in college. In fact, reading is the #1 predictor of success in college. Okay? So what we've done is put together a series. I started out first, and now we're going to talk about reading in the sciences. We have Dr. Laura Weiss-Cross with us today. You are from chemistry. No, biology. I'm sorry, I say that. I knew that was not right. And then we also have Dr. Melissa Mullen-Davis. She's also from biology as well. I said, all right, I'm on a roll now, Margaret. So anyway, they know what they're doing. I don't. I'm going to sit down and be quiet, but please give them your attention because I have some great strategies and skills to share. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah. So we are going to try to share our, I don't know what it was. Here, maybe? So we're going to share our recommendations for some ways to read actively in the sciences, for biology and chemistry. And then Dr. Mullen-Davis is also going to talk a little bit about some primary literature reading as well, which is something that you will almost certainly encounter in a number of your courses. So, let's get started. All right. Now, how many of you have heard this idea, like, I'll just lay my head down and I'll learn by osmosis? Seen this before? Okay. You know this idea that your high info in your books goes to the low info in your brain. It's just going to move directly like this, right? So, of course, we know our reading doesn't quite work like this. You have to engage more actively with it. This is also not osmosis. This is diffusion, right? So, diffusion is going to be this movement of high concentration to low concentration. If we're thinking about information as like something that you would measure concentration-wise. So this is probably a better meme if you're thinking about this kitten that's learning biology by diffusion rather than by osmosis. But that's not really going to help you very much. So let's actually get into what we're going to be focusing on today. We've got 3 major goals for today. Helping you learn how to get the right kind of information from your textbooks, from your primary literature, from whatever sources you are reading from. So that's going to be the first thing. But if it's very important to find this information, but you're in college, you're getting graded on things, right? So you need to be able to recall that information, to remember it, to recall it when you need it. Say, on an exam or a quiz, or when you're writing an essay, you need to be able to access this. And then also, you are really busy people, right? You have lots of things going on. So we want to help you do these things efficiently so that you have time for other things in your life, right? Your classes aren't everything that's going on here. I really like this chart. This is showing the ideal amount of time you're spending in each of these activities per week as a college student. So sleeping, very, very important, right? That's going to make up the biggest proportion here. You're spending some time in class, you're spending time studying, eating, certainly. But you're doing other things too, right? Many of you have jobs that you're working, you're spending time with friends, you're kind of taking a break from things on social media, you're exercising, playing video games, watching movies, whatever. So this is all part of everything that goes into what makes the college experience, right? So we want to make sure that you're studying efficiently. So when we're talking about reading these sources, why are you actually doing the reading in the first place? What is the point of doing the reading? You want to be a strategic reader, all right? If you're just reading to say, I've read 5 pages tonight, or I've read a chapter, that's not really why you're reading. Why are you reading? And I'll take any sort of input from the audience. Why are you reading your textbooks in the first place? Yeah. Right, you're reading to learn the information, not to be like, I read a chapter or I read a book. You're trying to attain that information. So the other thing to keep in mind is that you have grades and the things that you're submitting. You're going to be assessed on how well you learned that information, right? So maybe your class uses multiple choice. Maybe you use a lot of problem solving in your classes. Maybe you're just trying to remember information and report it back. Maybe you're taking that information and you have to apply it to something. You go, okay, well, I understand how this process works. How might I apply this in a clinic? Or how might I apply this in the field somehow? Are you analyzing information? These are all different levels of learning, right? Are you going to be writing about this? Short written responses, maybe longer essay writing. These are things that you may not know right at the beginning of your class, when your class starts, but you're learning over time, right? You're asking your professor what kind of questions are going to be on the exam. After you've had an exam, you're probably like, okay, I have a feel for what this is going to look like. So these sorts of things are going to affect how you read the text. So let's think about multiple choice for a minute. Who here loves multiple choice? Okay, all right. So multiple choice, you've got a limited number of options. That's really great, right? But multiple choice questions can sometimes be kind of tricky on exams. So this means that you're gonna need to pay attention to a lot of details, a lot of detailed information, distinguishing between multiple things. That's showing up a lot on multiple choice. If you're problem solving, you want to be practicing doing mathematical problems or any sort of problem sets that are showing up in your classes. If you're just trying to recall information, this is what I call this is just like memorization. Can you define this term? Do you know what this thing is? Do you know what it does? These are very straightforward. Application versus analysis are going to require higher order thinking, right? Higher level application. So you probably need to do different preparation for these types of questions. Drawing things out, mapping them out more. For written responses and essay writing, this is going to focus a lot on can you do the big picture, right? Can you talk about this? Can you map it out in maybe 1 or 2 or 3 major parts and explain it to somebody else? So maybe you want to try practicing explaining things to your roommate, or if your roommate is like, oh, I just don't care about this at all. You can practice talking to your pet or a stuffed animal. It doesn't matter. Talking to the wall. Practice talking it out. That's going to help you. And then practice mindfulness. So this is what we normally think of when we think of mindfulness, but you can also be very mindful about your reading. You don't want to just read it passively. You're trying to engage with that material so you can pull it out and use it later. So, some tips here. Try reading backwards. We can read this. This is kind of hard to look at, right? That's not really what I mean by reading backwards. That's probably not going to help you very much. But if you can do that, that's actually kind of cool. When I say read backwards, I'm talking about the structure of your textbooks. So you're probably doing them maybe a chapter at a time. don't read them from beginning to end. I'd say start at the back. There are usually some practice questions, things like that. If you have time, and that's what this asterisk is here for, if you have time, just try answering those questions on your own before you ever really get into the material. This should prime you for what you want to focus on. A lot of times the way that you learn best is if you got something wrong first. So this is a great way to be like, I got something wrong and it didn't hurt me, but I'm going to now figure out why it was wrong by looking at the rest of the material. This reading the chapter summary, I recommend doing this before you even cover this material in class. I know you're told to read your textbook before class. Oftentimes you may not have time to read the whole chapter or the whole section. Read the chapter summary. It's short, it's a paragraph, maybe a few paragraphs. This gives you an idea of the major topics that are going to be covered, and you can kind of map this out in your notes. After you've read the chapter summary, you can look at the headings and subheadings for that chapter, and once again, map this out in your notes. It gives you like signposts of places that you're going to be going. And then once you've done that, then you can start at the beginning. So at the beginning, then you start with the introduction, which gives you that big picture view. The introduction may actually be helpful for some of your writing response kind of questions. And then you can read the chapter. I recommend not reading a whole chapter at once, but reading them sections at a time. This can help you retain that material better.
And I think if I could add,
yes,
if you're reading your chapter, all of this before your class, you might approach it slightly differently than if you're reading the chapter after the class. If you've had a class on the topic, then I would say absolutely try to do the questions first, because you've already been exposed to the topic a little bit, and then it will help you focus in on those sections, and maybe looking at the headings and subdivisions you want to focus more on based on how your answers were to those end of chapter questions.
So now we've talked about the structure. Let's say you're now into reading your text. How do you actually read it? You don't really want to read it just like you would a newspaper, right? When you're reading a newspaper, you're just kind of getting the gist of things. You're just trying to stay up to date on what's going on in the news. But you're not pulling out all of those details. I also don't recommend relying heavily on a highlighter. I know a lot of people are like, I'll just highlight all the important parts. But this really isn't that great a way to engage actively with the material. You may think you're doing more than you actually are when you see all that highlighting. So instead, you want to employ active reading. So this is more akin to having a conversation. And I realize your textbook is not going to talk back to you most of the time, unless you have a special kind of textbook. So when I say that having a conversation to it, you want to be really focused. If you're too distracted, if you're thinking about other things, you're not really focusing on that material. So I would say if you're feeling distracted, maybe take a lap. Take a lap around your house or around your building or something like that. Or something that I do when I'm struggling to focus on something, I literally set a timer on my phone. I'm like, okay, I may not be able to focus for an hour, but I can focus for 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. And I'm going to make myself pay attention only to this and nothing else. And that, weirdly, the timer seems to work for me. Contribute to the conversation. So this involves you making something. You're making something new as you are engaging with this material. I also recommend that as you're reading text, you've got some input goals and some output goals in mind. So your input goals are going to be fixed. So this is a fixed amount of time. I've set a timer for 15 minutes. I'm going to read 15 minutes uninterrupted. So that would be an input goal or a really fixed goal. A concrete goal is focused on like a product that you're making. And an output goal, this is something that you're going to make after this. So Maybe your goal is to write a half page of notes. Maybe it's to draw something out. But you're making yourself make something. And it can be small, but as long as you have these input and output goals in mind, it should help you kind of focus on those things. So when I say you're going to make something, of course, when you're writing notes, that's making something, that's great. But sometimes in the sciences, just the written words isn't capturing everything. So you might want to try making other things. If you're going through a lot of terminology, you might want to make some flashcards, either physical flashcards or online flashcards like Quizlet to help you learn these terms. You might want to make some concept maps. So if you're just comparing animal cells and plant cells, and you're creating like a visual medium to map this out, it helps you remember it later because you have that picture in mind rather than just words. Or flow charts. Here we've got some processes of the Krebs cycle here, how you're incorporating sugars as well as fats. How do they flow into this? All right.
We can also think about decision trees, like if you have to classify, right, a molecule in this example as either an acid or a base, how do you do that? What steps do you take to figure out that answer? So you can make some of these kind of decision trees to help you practice and think about these stepwise. So you think of them all at once, sometimes it's too overwhelming. And then you can also group or classify by different characteristics of a group of things. Here we have amino acids, and this person, whoever groups them in certain ways. And there are different ways that you can group them, but they were grouped this way. And sometimes that can help you remember what they are and their identities, and also think about what they look like, or whatever it is that you're grouping.
Okay, so here's a little bit of some interactive part for you. We're going to do a little bit of a pop quiz. Just so you participate. Got this lovely bowl of candy. You can add candy to your pizza here. So I focus a lot on terminology in my classes. I mean, a lot of people do, but I always want students to think about the components of the words, because instead of just memorizing words, if you can apply knowledge that you knew before, this is going to make it easier for you. So let's start with this word heterotroph. How many of you know what this word means? I think so. Okay. All right. So can you explain what the word means and how you get it? Okay, so it hunts for food, it outsources for food, right? So there's two parts to this word. There's hetero, which means different, and there's troph, and troph is referring to nutrient acquisition. So a heterotroph has to go get their food somewhere else, somewhere that's not inside their body. This would be different from an autotroph, which is making their own food. So hetero, different, troph, nutrient acquisition. So thank you very much. Cephalopod. Thinks they know cephalopod, or maybe part of this. All right.
Intent pod.
Right, so pod like podiatry, feet, right? So pod is referring to your feet. What's the cephalo part referring to? I just started doing it myself. What do you think ceph or cephalo? It's referring to your head. So things like encephaly, you're talking about the head, or encephalitis, inflammation, like. So cephalo is referring to the head. Cephalopods are going to be things like your octopus that have the big head and all the feet. So things like that. Prokaryotic. How about this one? Can anybody come in on this? Or part of this? I know that they're like cells of some sort. Okay, so it's a type of cell. Excellent. Pass in front of this camera here. There you go. So, what do you know about this type of cell?
I think it's like I think it's like a difference between like animal and like living things, and then like plants are like a different type of cell.
Okay, so it's referring to its complexity, right? So we've got prokaryotic, we've got eukaryotic. These are your two major types of cells. So pro, in this case, means before. So the like before times. Pro is before. This word carry, K-A-R-Y, means nucleus. So these are cells that are really, really simple and have been around before the nucleus was developed. So very simple cells. Yeah. And then eukaryotic cells, these are true nucleus cells. They're much, much bigger, much more complex. Mesoderm. What do we think about this one? It's getting a little harder. Does anybody think they know what mesoderm is? Yeah.
Something to do with the skin.
Okay. So you said something to do with the skin, right? Why do you say that? The derm, right? So derm refers to skin or tissue. Does anybody know? Does anybody know what meso means? What's that? Maybe a layer, right? So meso means middle, and derm refers to tissue. So during embryonic development, we've got 3 layers. This is the middle layer, so mesoderm. And I'm bringing this up because you can apply a lot of these same prefixes and suffixes in different parts of your courses. Okay, so let's get into some bigger words. Myocardial infarction. Who knows what this is? let's do Adriana, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it's a heart attack, all right? So you may know that already, but what parts of this may tell you that this means a heart attack? Yeah, the cardio part, right? So you can think cardiac refers to the heart. Myo means muscle. So this is the muscle of the heart. Infarction is like a death of the tissue. Myocardial infarction. All right, gluconeogenesis. All right, so this is a little bit more challenging, but what do we think about this one? Does anybody think they know at least part of it? Yes?
I think it means something related to sugar. Yeah, glucose.
Okay, so something related to sugar. So why do you say that?
Because the suffix is glucose, I think.
Yeah, because we're starting with glucose, right? So glucose, something to do with sugar. What about these other 2 parts? Yeah. Exactly. So sorry. So genesis is creation. Neo is going to mean new. So you're making new glucose. It tells you exactly what it's doing. So it's a process by which your body makes new glucose when you haven't been, supplied with a bunch of sugary things. So if you're in a fasting state, you can have this. Okay, thrombocytopenia. This is a medical term. But are there any parts of this that look familiar to you? What do you think? What about thrombo? What do you think about thrombo? What does that make you think of? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you over there.
Blood clot.
Okay, so like a clot, right? So a thrombus is a blood clot. So thrombo is referring to blood clotting. What about these other parts? Cytopenia. Does that make you think of anything? All right, but this was kind of challenging, right? So cyto just means cell. So this is a thrombo cell, which is your platelet. Your platelet is involved in blood clotting. And then penia means a lack of. So this means you don't have enough platelets, so you're not going to clot very well if you have thrombocytopenia. All right, last one. Adrenocorticotropic. One of my favorite ones. So what do we think about this? Go ahead, Julia. Okay. Okay, all right, so you got us like 2/3 of the way there, right? So adreno means adrenal, so like your adrenal glands, which are these glands that are sitting on top of your kidneys. Cortico, you said corticosteroids. So corticosteroids are coming from this part of the adrenal gland. The cortex is the outer region. And then tropic means like it's a signaling cascade. You have one thing that's causing another thing, that's causing another thing, and so on and so forth. So this is a type of hormone that is part of a signaling cascade that goes to your adrenal glands. So thank you very much for participating. And I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Nolan Davis.
Oh, so one more thing about reading and thinking about when you're reading through, my advice is to test your knowledge along the way. We know that one of the best ways to learn is by trying to remember things and recalling things. So challenge yourself with practice as you read, right? Maybe use the mid-chapter or end-of-chapter questions if you have a textbook. You can come across a key term in bold and see if you can define it in a different way. Or if there is a figure, try to explain it in your own words as you're going through. And that's one way of being an active reader and thinking about things as you're going and challenging your brain to remember or use different words to explain the same concept. Also, I see a lot of our students in chemistry in particular, because that's what I teach, focus on practicing the math questions. There's a whole bunch of topics, some math-based, some conceptual. Most of my students will just do lots and lots of math practice. I think it's easy to think of questions related to math. But don't forget to practice with the conceptual work too, right? And not just focus on the math-based one. So do both, right? Think about the conceptual and the math-based as you go through. So practice makes progress. Okay. So do you want to
Sure, yeah. Okay, so we've given you a lot of different things that you can work on, and that can sometimes be overwhelming. So I would say, how do you get started here? Make sure that you're reading every day. All right, that doesn't mean you have to read for every single one of your courses every day, or you have to read like a ton every day. But if you do it every day, you can build it into your schedule. This makes it easier for you to practice these things. So this would be your input goal. Set a goal for how much time you're going to spend working on a particular subject or reading a particular area. You also want to practice this active reading, so make sure you're making something, that you're not just reading and highlighting. You're taking notes, you're making concept maps, you're grouping things, whatever makes sense for what you're doing, make sure you're doing that too. All right, and once again, it doesn't have to be huge, but you have to do it every single time that you're reviewing this material. And then the fun part, reward yourself for meeting these goals, because it helps with your motivation, right? So if you're like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm doing this all this week, and at the end of this week, I can, go play soccer with my friends, or treat myself to a chai latte. That's my particular favorite. Or I'm gonna watch a movie with my friends on Netflix, or play video games, whatever. Build this into it too, because it's good for you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that part. Alright. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit. How many of you have ever had to read scientific literature for a class? A couple, right? And they love these papers and something like this, right? With long titles where you don't always know all the words mean. So, right? FDX1 regulates cellular protein lipoylation through direct binding to LIAS. I don't know what all of that means either. We can use some of our root words to try and figure some of it out. But these pose a different challenge to reading. And so, because some of you might have seen it before, and some of you might not, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview as to what this is and like kind of parts of it and how to approach these. Because you will all in science, right, biology and chemistry have to read these at some point. Okay. So why do they exist? First of all, why do we have these research publications that seem so complicated? These are where researchers publish the most recent discoveries from the field. Cutting edge work, new discoveries. Things that would never be in a textbook because they're too new, right? So who are these researchers? They're professors, they're graduate students, they're undergraduate students, they're people in research centers, occasionally in industry labs, right? And they use very specific technical language. They're writing for other experts in the field to share this new information and discovery with them, right? But reading these, especially when you're just getting started, can be super overwhelming, right? There are so many technical words that you don't know. And honestly, when I read a paper, there are super technical words that I don't know. I just have more experience reading them and know which I can skip over and which I have to look up. And that's the biggest difference, right? So this cartoon is, if you make the paper too easy to read, everyone will know how you got the results, right? They're very complicated. We do want them to know, everyone to know how we got the results, but sometimes it can feel hard to distinguish that if you're not used to reading them. Okay, so this is an example of one in chemistry. So what is going on here? So this is the paper. This up here is the name of the journal. This is the Journal of the American Chemical Society, right? Here's the title. This one's a little bit easier. And these are the authors who did the work, right? There's a whole bunch. Science is usually not done in isolation. Sometimes you see up to 50 authors on a paper. And those are all the people who contributed ideas or work or writing or something to all the research that goes in there. Okay. The first authors, here the first three or the first couple, are the ones who are in the lab doing the actual work, at least in biology and chemistry, right? They're the graduate students, they're the researchers who are in there doing the work, right? The ones at the end, these two are more likely the professors who are running the lab, who are contributing ideas and funding. So when you think about these authors, no matter how many there are, the first ones contributed the most to the research, usually the hands-on practical part, and the last ones are doing like money and guidance and big ideas. Then we have the abstract. The abstract is the short summary of the article, right? A little bit of intro, a little bit of methods, a little results, a little big picture. So if you come across an article, this is where you look first, right? What is this all about? This will give you a lot of that info. Some journals also have these graphical abstracts. So it's just supposed to be a figure summarizing the whole thing. So hopefully this would do it. And some of them are more silly and cartoony and memey now, like more like memes. And some are more serious and data. Just depends. Whatever they think will help get the point across, and you see this structure changes and this structure changes, and that's probably what they're talking about in the piece. Okay, so there's usually once you keep going after the abstract, there are different sections of a paper for a traditional layout. There's the introduction or background that gives you information to understand the topic, what gap in current knowledge, what do you absolutely need to understand what's going on. My favorite part of a scientific paper, because I have a favorite part, is the last paragraph of the introduction. Because it's usually a really good summary of the goal of the research, and sometimes even tells you what it is in 1 or 2 sentences, even better than the abstract, right? So that last paragraph of the introduction is so powerful and helpful for keeping that big picture in mind. There's also usually materials and methods section that's a super detailed description of the methods used and the essential components of each experiment. Away. She likes the method section. It's not a recipe, but a super detailed list, and sometimes it even lists the companies where they purchased those chemicals, the concentrations used. So if someone wanted to go repeat an experiment, they would look there and get everything they needed. Okay. There's a results section. This is where there's all the data and graphs and tables. And then the text describes the data in context. And last but certainly not least is the discussion, which explains the results and puts it in context and describes the significance in the bigger picture, right? What does this mean? Why is this important? Of course, now we're interested. Okay, so do we go through and read this exactly front to back like a novel? No. Just like reading a textbook chapter, we wouldn't go straight through reading it. Everyone has their kind of own way of doing it, but my recommendations are here, right? Do not read it like a book. Okay. Look over the abstract, because that's a summary of everything, and skim the introduction for key points. Look for key things. Look at that last paragraph. Sometimes if you don't know, you don't understand the topic or it's new to you, you can read the introduction a little bit more, but I would even wait on that, right? Skim it. Look at the results first, specifically the figures in the tables. You can go back to the introduction if you need to look something up, but that's the bulk of the paper. That's what these people want to share with you, the data. And if you can, try to come up with your own conclusions about what the data says. Right? That might help you. And then read the results section, and then I go to discussion to think about what it really means. And you can go back to the introduction as needed. And I only look at the methods if I want to find something. They're not written in a way where you would understand or it would explain to you what the method is. That's actually in the results section, or it should be, right? In order to find out this piece of information, we use this method, right? The method section, do not go there unless you need to.
Yeah, it takes a really
super
long
dense.
time. It's not very accessible.
No.
But like, if you are a researcher and you want to know how to do this experiment, or you're like, well, wait, how did they get this information, or where did this material come from? What kind of animal were there? How were they housing it? That's where you go to the methods. But oftentimes, I completely skip it.
It's too dense. It's not helpful. And then use similar techniques as above. Write down key points. Your turn. Of course, any questions you have? Okay. So this is an example of a figure. Oftentimes there's a lot going on, and then underneath is this big figure caption. This explains parts of the figures, but there's a lot of experimental details here. So you, if you're somewhat familiar with the method, should be able to look at this figure and read here and understand what the author is trying to show you, what data was collected. So we hope you found this helpful. I do have a slide with extra questions that we can ask you to earn more candy, but I thought maybe given the time, we can ask if you have any questions for us. Or do we want to talk with? They want candy. You want candy? Okay. They want candy. Okay. These are, I didn't annotate them in. They're all up there at once. Okay. So, what section of a literature paper would you find? 1. Details about the experimental method or protocol? What do we think? Anyone for the top one? Not a trick question. Methods? Yeah. And where else? The introduction maybe, or the figure captions. The figure captions have a lot of experimental detail. Okay. What about where would you get a summary of the whole paper? The introduction, or before the introduction even, the abstract would be a good summary of the whole thing, a little bit of everything. Some of these are, they're not tricky, they're really straightforward. Who's the people who did the work? The first 2 people listed, right? That's not necessarily trivial, because in some fields, the people who did most of the work are at the end, and the people who funded the project are at the beginning. So it's important to remember that. And where would you find comments about the broader significance of the results, like the why we care. 2 places, I guess. Maybe at the end? If it's not the results, it's the discussion. So, there's lots of different sections. So you might encounter these along the way. Don't freak out when you don't know all the words. That's my recommendation. Take it easy. Take a deep breath and then keep going. Okay.